Do you know how to handle promises when testing JavaScript code? In this video, we're going to be learning how to use Jest to properly handle asynchronous code. This is one of many videos in this Jest video series. Hi, my name is Marco Cruz and I'm the founder of automateNow. You can learn more about us by going to automateNow.io. Now, let's dive into the code. We can't talk about testing asynchronous code without talking about these two important keywords, which is async and await. In this video tutorial, we're going to be writing different tests that are going to be using these keywords. Here we have a sample test, which is going to call a mock API to retrieve a user list. And we can see here what's happening. We're going to be calling an endpoint called users, and then we're going to be asserting that the response status is 200. But the thing that I want to draw your attention to here is these two keywords. Notice that the test function is using async. Okay, so this is an asynchronous function. And then right here, when we are capturing the response, we need to use await. And that is because we're calling this API client, which in theory is going to take some time to process our request. So we need to wait for that request to come back. And that's why we have await here. Now, if we were to omit this keyword here, the test would continue executing, it would go to this line right here, and then go to the next line without waiting. Okay, so this means that your test is going to become flaky. Okay, sometimes it may pass, sometimes it may fail. So essentially that means that you're going to get unpredictable results. Let us look at some examples on how to use async and await to handle asynchronous operations. All right, guys, so it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of things and learn how to do this asynchronous testing using Jest. All right, so here I have this class that I've created. It's called API Client. This class is going to simulate making HTTP requests to an API without actually making any network calls. Let's have a look at what we have in this class. So right here, we have this first method, which is just a basic get method. This method requires that we pass in an endpoint, and let's see what we have inside of the method. So basically, we're going to be doing a simulation of a network delay of 100 milliseconds. Then we're going to check to see what endpoint the user is trying to hit. So in this case, if we have this endpoint, the user's endpoint, we're going to return a status code of 200, which is a success. And we're going to return this array containing these two objects right here. Okay, so we have a couple of items in here, which has an ID, a name, and an email address. Now, on the other hand, if we have this other endpoint, if the user is trying to use users/1, then we're also going to return a 200, and we're going to return the first object inside of that array. And lastly, if the user is trying to reach some other endpoint that does not exist in here, then we're going to return a 404 in this error message right here. We have another method here, and this is going to be our post method. This requires an endpoint as well. It also requires some data object. We can see here that this is also going to simulate a network delay, and we're going to be checking here what endpoint the user is trying to reach. If they're trying to reach users, then we're going to have this right here. So it's going to check, is the user passing in the data? Does the data contain a name? And does it also contain an email address? If that information is missing, then we're going to present the user with this error right here. Now, if everything checks out okay, then we're going to be returning this 201 status code, which means that something got created. And then we have here the data that we're going to be returning. And we have here an ID that's going to be random from 0 to 999. Then we're going to be returning the data. And we're also going to be creating a date to simulate when this data was created. Lastly, if the endpoint is not found, then we're going to return a 404. All right, so that's it for this API client. Now let's move on to the testing side. So I have this file right here called API client.test.js. And in here, we're going to be writing some tests. All right, so let's go through here at a high level what we're going to be testing. I've created this describe function right here. It says API client basic async testing. And before every single test, we're going to be creating a new instance of the API client. And moving on down here, we have the first test. This test is going to check that we should get a user list. Okay, so we're going to be using a get request in this case. We're also going to be checking that we can use the post method to create some new user. And lastly, we're going to be doing some error handling to make sure that the API is returning a 404 anytime that we don't provide the correct data that it expects, or if we're trying to call an endpoint that doesn't exist. All right, so let's go up here and start creating this first test. So let's go ahead and call the users endpoint to retrieve the list of users. All right, so here I'm going to create a constant. I'm going to call it response, and then I'm going to say API client, and then I'm going to say dot get, and then we're going to pass in /users because that's the endpoint that we need to call. All right, let's go ahead and move on down, and then we're going to make the actual assertion. Okay, we are actually going to be making a few assertions to ensure that, for example, that we're getting the correct response code and that we're getting the correct data, etc. So here we're going to say expect, and then we're going to say response dot status, and then we're going to use a matcher called to be. Okay, we used this one in the past, and we want to make sure that it is 200. Let's make another assertion here. We're going to say expect that the response dot data. Then we're going to be using a new matcher that we haven't used in the past. This one is called to have length. And can you guess what we need to put in here? Well, it's pretty simple. We know that the data right here has 2 rows. All right, so these 2 items right here. So that's what we need to put a number 2 right here. All right, so I want to do one more assertion. I'm going to say expect response dot data, and I want to check the first item. So I'm going to use brackets here. I'm going to put a number 0, and then I want to ensure that it equals a certain value. So here we're going to be using to equal. So now here I can just go back over here and just grab the first item, grab this information right here, and let's go back over here and paste it here. All right, let me just go ahead and put everything in a new line so it looks nice and clean. This is what we should expect on that first item. So our test is complete, or is it? Well, right here, we know that this test function is asynchronous. That means that we need to use await so that we can wait for the response that comes back from the API, right? So here we need to say await. Otherwise, this code is not going to wait for this response to come back. It's going to proceed from this line to the next line to the next line. So our test may be flaky. All right, so this is going to ensure that we wait for the response and then we check the response. All right, so now the test is complete and we can go ahead and test it. So let me go ahead and save everything here. Then I'm going to bring up a terminal, and then we're going to say npm and then test. Now, since I have other test files here, I want to only run this API client tests. So here I can just call it API client, and then we're going to hit enter. And then we can see that we have 1 test suite and we have 4 tests that have passed. Now, we've only written one of those tests so far. The other ones are not implemented yet, but we know that our test here is working as expected. Now, let's make it fail. Let's say that we expect here a 201. Now, let's go ahead and save this here. And we're going to make sure that this test is still working properly by calling it again. And this time we see that the test has failed. If I move this up here, we're going to see the failure here. We're going to see that we are expecting a 201, but we received a 200. All right, so our test is working great. Let's move on to the next test. Okay, so we're done testing this over here. Let's move down to error handling this time. All right, so we're going to make sure that when we call an incorrect endpoint that we get a 404. All right, we already saw a preview of that when I made a mistake up here. But this time we're going to use the proper assertions to ensure that this test is going to pass when we get a 404. So let's go ahead and write this test here. We're going to say const, and then we're going to say response is equal to await. I'm going to call our API client, and we're going to say get. And let's just pass in an invalid endpoint. I'm going to say invalid endpoint. And I have a typo over here, so let me go ahead and fix that. Next, let's go ahead and perform the assertion. So we're going to say expect, and we're going to say response dot status, and this status should be a 404. Okay, pretty simple. If we go back over here, we can see here that this get method returns this 404 right here. We also see that it returns an error message, so perhaps we should check this error message as well. So let's go ahead and write an assertion for that. So right here, we're going to say expect response dot error, and this error should be not found. And that's all we need for this test. Okay, pretty straightforward. we're going to call an invalid endpoint. And because this endpoint doesn't exist in this get method, we only have these two endpoints right here. We're going to get this 404, and we're going to validate that in here. All right, so let's go ahead and save this and give it a run. And our test is working as expected. We can see here that all of our tests have passed. It's always good practice to ensure that your test is covering all possible scenarios. So in the event that you write a bad test here, let's say that you say not included, right, for example, and we run this, we want to also ensure that this test is going to fail, right? So we can see right here. So we're expecting this, and we found that right there. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. Let's undo that change right there. And the last test that I want to write here is this one that's going to handle validation errors. Okay, so let's go ahead and create some invalid user data here. So I'm going to say const invalid data. And then we're going to say is equal to, and let's provide here a name. I'm going to say test user, but we're not going to provide an email. Okay, so this is invalid data, as we saw earlier. When you only provide the name or the email, but not both, then that's going to create issues. So we're going to be checking for that here. Let's go ahead and say here, await, and then expect API client dot post. Our endpoint here is going to be /users, and we're going to pass in the invalid data. Then we're going to use yet another new matcher called rejects. Okay, let's see what rejects says. So rejects is used to unwrap the region of a rejected promise so any other matcher can be chained. Okay, if the promise gets fulfilled, the assertion fails. Okay, so this is going to ensure that whenever we make this call, then we get a rejection. Okay, the promise doesn't get fulfilled. Now, if it does get fulfilled, we know that there's a problem. So this is going to fail right here. So let's go back over here and check that. So we're going to say ensure that this rejects. And then we're going to chain another matcher, like it says in the documentation. We're going to say toThrow. Okay, so we expect some exception to occur. Okay, so let's go ahead and check what it's supposed to throw over here. Let's go right here. So we can see it throws this error right here. So let me just go ahead and grab this. And I'm going to add it here. And we're done with this test as well. All right, so there's our test. So we're going to be calling this user's endpoint, and we're going to pass in invalid data, and we should expect this to get rejected and throw this exception right here. So let's go ahead and test this out, make sure that we are receiving that exception. I'm going to run this. And we can see here that our test has passed, and that is because we did get this exception here. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you guys have any questions, please comment below, give this video a thumbs up, and subscribe to this channel. And don't forget that you can find the link to this repo that we're using in this video series so that you can follow along. I'll see you in the next video.